Alrighty, so we are going to start right here at the beginning with GED math, what to expect when you're testing. And again, as I said, it'll be helpful for you guys to let me know if you're taking GED, that's great. We've got a lot of great information about GED, but also if you're taking high set or task, just pop up in that chat and let me know. It looks like we've got a high setter. Good for you. You're gonna like the format of this test. It's pretty cut and dry. So we'll get to your good news here in a second. Looks like we got people jumping into chat as well and taking GED math. Okay. So all of those are great to know, and I'll take note of those as we get started. Please let me know if you're taking task, because that'll let me know if we need to jump into that information as well. Well, again, we have titled this session GED Math, What to Expect When You're Testing, because that expectation is a huge part of your preparation, not just in your subject study and all the lessons and all the different parts of math from just a concept area that you need to work on for your preparation, but also just what to expect when it comes to the actual test. Just a short introduction. I'm Jen Denton. I am a student success coach here on a part of our student success team at Essential Education. And we have one big phrase that we use, and that is your success is our goal, meaning that we exist to help you get farther in life, whether that is passing a subject matter test or whether that's passing the whole test and moving on to get your high school equivalency credential, or even helping with job skills after that. So we are here to help you, and your success is our goal. Alrighty, so let's jump in. Math seems to be that subject that is the thorn in the side of a lot of our students. And we hear a lot of different statements, sometimes sometimes voiced in frustration about math. And so which of these statements applies to you? Would it be that maybe you're in the minority and you used to be good at math, but now you just need a refresher? That's great. 9 times out of 10, a lot of this stuff is going to come back to you really, really quickly if you're in this boat. Maybe you like math, but you just never got good grades. It just never really clicked on paper. You liked it, you were interested in it, you understood it, but when it came to taking the test, something just threw you off. Maybe no matter how hard you study, you just don't get it. You're just one of those people like me that just doesn't see it all the time, that you really have to learn and process things in a different way. It just doesn't click and come naturally. Maybe some of you are in this boat. Maybe math teachers didn't always teach in the way that you needed to be taught. You needed to see things in a different way or from a different perspective, and the rest of the class didn't, so they seemed to move on without you. So sometimes the teaching environment, or the platform at least, that in the way that the material is presented, can really trip some people up. Maybe you just don't like math. You're one of those people that says, hey, yeah, learning algebra is really going to come in handy when I'm in this big algebra season, or I have this big algebra project at work. And we laugh at that because that's not typically the case. But I mean, the fact is we do use math in our everyday lives. And while we don't always see the big picture, it can be there. It's there for us. Maybe, and this is a big one, maybe you have a learning difference. And I specifically use the word difference versus disability because some of us do have things that are diagnosed. And by the way, if you do, please pursue any accommodations that you have available to you through the testing board, whether that be GED, high set, or task, because those testing accommodations really can help you. They can provide extra time, they can provide single study space, but if you have a diagnosed disability, those accommodations really can help you. But I think a lot of us, whether we're diagnosed or not, we just have learning differences. We all learn in different ways. So whether it's a diagnosis or just you have a feeling in your gut that you just don't learn in the same way that someone else does, try to embrace that for a positive. Just take it as a learning difference, knowing that studying can sometimes be a challenge, but it's not something that you can't overcome. This is a big one for a lot of us, and I definitely fall into this category. I get test anxiety before math tests. And I think if anything, that's what we want to help you with today, that anxiety that comes not only about the subject matter when it's not our favorite subject, when we haven't gotten good grades in math before, when we didn't always learn things or we don't like it, Another added part of that anxiety can just be not knowing what to expect on that test or what it's going to look like. So here's some sources of that test anxiety. Maybe we've had previous negative experiences with a teacher or with previous failing grades. Maybe we just had past mistakes. We just dwell on, gosh, this just never worked for me before, and I just don't think that it ever will. The longer we spend time dwelling on what happened in the past, the less time we have to forge forward to figure out a new approach or a new method that we can use to attack the problem. And again, those learning differences. Maybe you felt, you just felt different, and that was a source of anxiety for you, that you just didn't feel that you were up to par with your peers, and that gave you a low confidence when it came to math because of those learning differences. I think the biggest one, however, one that maybe if you fall into those first three categories, you still might fall into this one, this overall fear of failure. What if I don't pass? And that's natural for all of us. I think that a lot of students that I talk to, they need this high school equivalency. They have a lot riding on this, whether it be for job placement or career placement or just taking those next steps in life. There's a lot of pressure riding on these exams. But I can tell you one thing that will not happen. If you get 5 questions in, 10 questions in, 15 questions in, and you start watching the clock and that looming feeling comes over, oh my goodness, what if I don't pass? Oh my goodness, what if I don't pass? Not only will that zap your confidence, but it's also going to take away one really precious thing, and that is time. We'll talk about the length of time that you have in each of these testing sections here in a second, depending on what you're taking. But don't let that fear of failure, that what if I don't pass, not only steal your confidence, but take away from precious time. Try as much as you can to stay in the moment and attack each problem as it comes. So, what am I here to say? We are here for you, and you are not alone. It's why we created these coaching sessions, not only so you can hear from somebody like me to maybe get some encouragement or some pointers, but also to know that there are other people out there just like you that are studying for these exams, that are trying to take those next steps in life. And even if you're not all taking the same exam, you are all here for math today. So something tells me that you're not alone, and at least a partial struggle or curiosity at minimum about this math exam. And here's your first math statement for the day. You ready? I got really clever with this. Preparation is, oh, here we go, greater than anxiety. Using that little math term right there. Your preparation, not only again for the subject matter, but for what that test is going to look like, is always going to outweigh your anxiety and give you a boost of confidence. I mean, think about it this way. Think if I asked you, hey, why don't you come and talk about something that you're really good at? It could be a hobby. It could be just something you love. It could be the latest episode of The Bachelor. Oh my goodness, let me tell you what happened this week. It can be a movie or a book or a sport that you really love. And you know everything there is to know about this subject. But when I ask you to come and talk about it, I don't tell you how many people you're going to be talking to. I don't tell you if you're going to be on a stage or if you're going to be on a couch. I don't tell you if you're going to be speaking to 5 people or 500 people. All of those things, if you don't know what to expect, can throw you off, regardless of how much you know about a subject. So my point here is, while you're trying to cram in all of this subject study, it's just as important to know what to expect on these tests, to know what they look like, to know that you're getting test-specific preparation for these individual subjects. All righty. Looks like we don't have any more questions, but we do have some more people popping in. That's great. So now what? Now we need to look at how we need to get prepared to know what to expect when you're taking this math test. So first question, what math topics are on the GED math test? There are some basic topics, and generally they cover geometry, basic algebra, graphs and functions, and basic math. Again, these general topics in the GED math test are geometry, that's the thing with all the shapes. Basic algebra, oh, that's that mix of numbers and letters that throws people off. Graphs and functions, they're going to ask you to look at things and make some logical assumptions from graphs, bar graphs, pie charts, those types of things. And then basic math. Well, what's covered in basic math? Numbers and the four operations. Your four operations are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. That makes the foundation of math. Now, you are going to need to utilize those skills, to use those skills, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, in geometry, in basic algebra. But within this basic math section, this is what makes up this foundation. And it's what's called basic math. You're going to use whole numbers to do basic math. You're going to ask to use decimals to do basic math, maybe some percents, and then fractions. And I think if I get any one big question, whether it's something simple or whether it's something complicated, a lot of our students are worried about fractions. And I think it's largely because we're so removed from that. I mean, I think that they're still beginning to teach fractions now in second and third grade. And so if you haven't had a refresher on fractions in quite some time, then that can seem almost like a foreign language. So we'll do some of those basic fraction problems together today. Basic math also includes exponents and finding square roots. Remember, your exponents and then finding the square roots are when you're talking about the power of those numbers, of whole numbers, decimals, and percents. And again, you're going to need those both in algebra and in geometry. So if I ever have a student that says, where do I start? I always point them to basic math, because this is going to be your foundation for everything that you'll study and everything you'll be tested on in the math section. What score do I need to pass the GED math test? And looking at our participants today, it looks like we've got somebody across the board, GED, HiSET, and TASC. So we'll talk about GED first. To pass the GED math test, you only need a minimum score of 145 out of 200, just like all the other sections. So here's the great news. You get 100 points just for showing up. So you only need to make up 45 more of those points. And that gets a little confusing sometimes, because someone will see, well, minimum score of 145 out of 200, that doesn't make sense because you said I only have to get 45% right. And that's, again, because you get that 100 points just for showing up. So you only have to make up 45 more out of those remaining 100 points to pass. So it may not be as daunting as you think. What about the HiSET? Just like all the other sections, you need 8 out of 20 points, or a 40% in this case, to pass the HiSET math. For TASC, you're looking at a scaled score, and that scaled score is on a range of 300 to 800, and you have to receive 500 points there to pass, and roughly that's 60%. Don't let that scare you if you're a task taker, because they do try to manage that. All of these kind of balance out to just think in your head, I've only got to get about half right to pass. Some a little bit easier, some a little bit more than others. Can I use a calculator on the GED math test? Yes, you can. There are certain sections of the GED math test that you can use a calculator on. They will let you know which sections there at your local testing center that you can use a calculator on. And the great news is you don't have to have the expense, and you don't need to bring that calculator when you come to take the GED. They will give you an embedded Texas Instruments on-screen calculator, and it's available for some of those math questions. Now, why is it embedded? That's because no matter where you go nationwide to take the GED, all of GED is administered on a computer. You'll take the test there in a test center with a live proctor, but you will take that test on a computer. And so I want to show you something today, because again, this falls into that category of you can study for subject material, but I also want you to know what to expect. And one of those things I want you to know what to expect is with this calculator. I've just taken us to GED.com, where they have a practice test calculator. This is the national testing site, and I really want you guys to get familiar with this tutorial that they have. It will show you what the calculator on the test will look like. It will allow you to view some of the basic functions, and you'll have a kind of a cheat sheet over here to the side, and you'll be able to see how to use that calculator that will pop up, kind of a screen in screen on your test. Get familiar with this. I would hate for you to spend so much time studying and getting all of your subject matter down, and then getting to the test and get tripped up time-wise or otherwise by this calculator. So make sure that you get to know that calculator really well. If you're studying for the TASC or for the HiSET, their testing center locations will also provide an on-screen calculator. For the test centers that are computer-based, please know that if you're taking the task or the high set, not all of your test centers are computer-based, and some of them do use pencil to Scantron, and you'll be able to look up your individual test center when you get ready to schedule to know if you are a computer-based testing center or if you're a Scantron-based testing center. If you are a Scantron-based testing center, they will provide you a physical calculator that you still need to be you still need to be acquainted with. And then if you're doing computerized high set or task, again, they'll have that pop-out calculator, and they also offer tutorials on their website. Alrighty, basic math sections do not allow the use of a calculator, so don't think that you can rely on those for those basic math sections, just those upper level sections. Alrighty. Is there a practice test I can take to see how much I already know? There sure is. And in fact, our free GED math practice test will offer some questions that are similar to those on the GED math test. You'll be able to get those on our site, whether you are a student of ours or not. And if you are an essential education student, you can take advantage of testing opportunities built into your lessons, both in the lessons themselves and by taking additional practice tests. Many people ask if there's a GED math book available. There certainly is. We have one called Essential Math Skills that's available on our website through our bookstore link, or you can simply go to Amazon.com and look for that Essential Math Skills workbook. Some students really like that because it is a complement to their studies. Even if you are already a student of ours, please note that we have online resources and workbook resources that correlate. So we had a student in an earlier session say, gosh, I'm really struggling with numeration, or I'm really struggling with fractions, and I want a supplement to that. If you're already a student with essential education, if you note in your lesson plan, you will see pop-ups every now and then that say, hey, this lesson corresponds to pages 125 to 127 in your workbook. And so some students really like having that workbook as a 1-2 punch to their study. What about Task and HiSET? Task and HiSET, they're national testing services. They also have test-specific workbooks that are available to you there if you need a supplement to your study. Alrighty, what about all those formulas? This is a big question. Do I have to memorize them all? And the big, wonderful answer that I get to give you today is absolutely not. You do not have to answer or come in with all of those formulas on your own. You can use the formula sheets that they give you right there in your pop out on your screen if you're taking it on a computer, or they will give you a physical copy of that formula sheet if you are taking on a Scantron at one of the pen to paper sites there for HiSET or Task. But this is roughly what that formula sheet will look like. So again, you do not have to memorize them. You do need to know what these letters stand for. You need to know that the area of a square is A equals side squared. You'll need to know what this L and this W stand for in a rectangle. The area is length times width. That in a parallelogram, area is base times height. So you will need to get to know these terms, but you do not have to remember the formulas themselves. Alrighty, here is a big, big part of your preparation that you may not have thought about yet. Question format and time. Let's start with HiSET because it is the most cut and dry. Remember our HiSET person, I told you you're gonna like this part. Alrighty, so you have 50 multiple choice. That's it. 50 multiple choice, and you have an hour and a half to do it. What's nice about that is you know what type of question you're going to have. Now, the subject matter is going to be across the board, but you don't have to worry about different types of questions. You only have multiple choice, and you have an hour and 30 minutes to do it. Task takers, you have 42 to 43 multiple choice with one tech enhanced if you're taking on the computer. So a good portion is cut and dry with multiple choice. You also have 11 gridded responses, which is a free entry response. It could be a table, it could be a fill in the blank. You could be asked to look at a graph and then fill in the next logical pattern, next logical step there. And then you have one constructed response, which could be an extended response to a word problem or something that they want you to show your work on. You do have an hour and 45 minutes to complete this section, so you have a little bit more time because you do have some variety in the types of questions that you are going to be asked, and the test makers want you to be able to do that with a little bit extra time. GED, here we go. You're my roller coaster students because you have 46 questions, which you think, oh, that's a lot less than these guys. But here's the catch. You do have an hour and 55 minutes because your test format is quite different. Because you were fully on the computer, the test makers can ask you questions in lots of different ways. The first type is fill in the blank. It could be a chart like this, where you look at some data and then you're asked to fill in the blank. Here it says, what is the average rate of change of the function gx? And then walks you through these steps and these changes in this chart. And then it says the average rate of change is, and they want you to fill in this answer. So this is an example of a fill in the blank. You could also have drag and drop questions. What does that mean? Well, you're on a computer, so you're going to physically click on one of these answer choices and physically drag it into the box here as your answer. If you are not studying on your computer, if you're not with Essential Education, somehow get familiar with this. We'd always love for you to jump in with us, but that's not what today's about. But somehow get some experience with these types of questions so they don't throw you off. If you are one of our Essential Education students, which I know we have some of you there, then take advantage of these in your lessons. Get that practice to get to know what that looks like. So again, this doesn't throw you off. And this question is actually one that we're going to complete together later today. Complete each equation by dragging expression and dropping it in the box. We're going to look at the equivalence to these expressions. Those out together. This is one we're actually going to answer today. Multiple choice. Again, everybody's got it, whether you're taking high set task or GED, you're all going to have multiple choice. Everybody understands how to use a multiple choice question. The only thing that might be different is you will click your answer there if you're taking it on a computer. So with multiple choice, there's one answer, you click, you move on. Now this one gets kind of tricky. Like our fill in the blanks or drag and drop that asks multiple questions, this one looks like one question, but it's actually more than one answer. So you have to figure some more things out. So this is kind of a sneaky way that they get in there to ask a little bit more. It says, which fractions are equivalent to 10 over 14? In order to know that, you basically have to look at each of the possible answers to see if it is an equivalent fraction to 10 over 14. And then here's the kicker, select all that apply. When it is a multiple select answer question, you're going to need to look at these directions very, very carefully. Select all that apply because you may have very well likely have more than one answer. You would select all that apply and then hit submit to move on. So they're getting kind of crafty with these. Alrighty, so let's move on to do some live lessons together today. And I'm going to switch back and forth between this presentation and then also switching on with my Apple Pencil on my iPad because it's a whole lot easier for me to explain this when I can write it out. And again, if you have any questions, please jump up there in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and just type in this answer, just be okay, so we can knock this out for our high set user. And let's talk about one of the most frequently asked about topics, and that is fractions. And here's the thing about fractions. Again, I said a lot of you are probably pretty far removed before, I jump back in and teach a section on fractions. I have to refresh my mind on how to do it. Simplifying reducing fractions, which means that fractions can be simplified by dividing the numerator and the denominator by something called the greatest common factor. And the greatest common factor is that factor of two or more of those numbers that is the same, and the greatest is the largest between the two. I would say that this process of simplifying fractions and finding the greatest common factor are two fundamental things that a lot of our students have forgotten how to do. And until you know how to do this fundamental thing, it makes higher level activities with fractions like multiplying fractions, dividing fractions, even adding and subtracting fractions much more difficult if you haven't gotten this foundational base. So that's what we're going to work on right now. I'm going to stop my share on the big screen, and I'm going to just share my iPad with you. Please don't forget to jump into that question and answer. I want to hear from you. I want this to be helpful for you guys today. So feel free to jump in on that at any time and we'll check that. All right, hopefully everybody can see my iPad. So we're going to start today with a super easy one and then we'll build up from there. So let's see, we used green last time. Let's do something else. Let's go blue this time. Alrighty, so I've got my handy dandy blue marker and I am going to write out pretty simple fraction, 2/4. Okay, so you might be saying, come on, Jen, that's super easy. I already know what that's going to look like when I reduce it. Well, humor me and let's do it at this most basic form so we can do it with some bigger numbers later. So if I'm going to reduce this fraction, the first thing I want to do is find that greatest common factor. And in order to do that, I have to figure out the factors for both the numerator and the denominator. Some people say you're using those big fancy words, numerator and denominator. This is how I always remember denominator. Denominator is the one that is down. If it's dot dot down, it's dot dot denominator. So the 2 here is the numerator and the 4 is the denominator. If I'm looking for factors, basically that means that I'm just looking for all the numbers that I could multiply together to add up to that number. And for the number 2, our numerator, there aren't many. It's just 1 and 2 because only 1 times 2 equals 2. When it comes to 4, our denominator, we of course have 1 and 4 because any number times 1 is going to be itself. So 4 times 1 will give us that 4. But there's also another factor in here, and that's also 2 because we know that 2 times 2 is 4. Well, we see that they have a common factor in the number 1, but we see a greater, you hear that? Greater common factor in the number 2. So the greatest common factor between 2 and 4 in our fraction 2/4 is 2. Once we find that, all we have to do to reduce that fraction is to divide the numerator by 2 and divide the denominator by 2. When we do that, we have 2 divided by 2, and of course that gives us 1. And we have 4 divided by 2, and that gives us 2. So all of a sudden, our 2/4 reduced becomes 1/2 or 1/2. And again, I said this is the easy way to do it. I want you to see it in the simplest form because really, whatever you do in the simplest form, you can also do when we start working with larger numbers. So let's work with a larger set now. Let's look at, back into my pen, let's look at 12/16. We're going to do 12/16. And the test says, look at this fraction, 12/16. Please reduce the fraction or find the greatest common factor. So again, we're going to look at our numerator first. Our numerator is 12. We know that 1 times 12 will give us 12. We also know, because it's an even number, that it can be divided by 2. So we know that 2 times 6 will give us 12. And then I can think of a set here in the middle that will give us 12 too, and that's 3 times 4. So we've got our factors of 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 itself. Now let's look at 16. We know we've got 1 and 16. It's also even, so we know we have 2 and 8. And we have a funky number here in the middle that 4 times 4 is also going to give us 16. So our factors of 16 become 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16 itself. So let's find the greatest common factor. We see 1 is in common, but we also see 2 is in common, and 2 is larger. No 3 in common. Oh, we have a 4 in common. No 6 in common, and no 8 in common. So between these two numbers, 4 is our greatest common factor. So again, to reduce 12/16, all we're going to do is divide 12 by 4, divide 16 by 4. 12 divided by 4 is going to give us 3. 16 divided by 4 is going to give us 4. And so 12/16 equals 3/4 or 3/4 when it is reduced. Once you can master these basic skills, the fundamental things for fractions and finding greatest common factors will become a lot easier as you go along. So let's get rid of that one. And we're going to jump out of the share and jump back in to our regular presentation. Alrighty, so we are back into this screen. Beyond fractions, I also get a lot of questions about basic algebra or algebraic functions. And when we look at algebra, remember, algebra is an expression of basic mathematical concepts. Again, that basic math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and exponents. But the difference is that algebra uses letters that are called variables in the place of certain numbers. So it's kind of like a missing puzzle piece. And a lot of times you have to figure out what that missing piece is. A lot of times they want you to solve for n or solve for x. They give you all the other pieces and they want you to figure out what that missing piece is. But sometimes you're going to have algebraic expressions and equations, and the test makers just want to know if you can rewrite those algebraic expressions and equations. Remember I told you when we were looking at our drag and drop earlier that we were going to come back and do this one in a little bit. And that's what we're going to do together now. So let's look at this problem. It says complete each equation by dragging an expression and dropping it in the box. They basically want you to rewrite these expressions in a different form. So before I switch to my iPad, I'm just going to write these down for us today. And I see that the first one they want us to do, because again, you're kind of answering two questions in one here. They want us to write 3 times x minus 2 in a different way. And they want us to write 2 plus x plus 2x minus 4 in a different way. So we're going to do that together, and while I switch back to my iPad, if you want to grab some scratch paper, you can work along with us and do that on your own that way. Here this. Jump back into this iPad. So here's the first one I wrote that they want us to rewrite in a different way. 3 times x minus 2. And I say times because anytime there's a number that's bumping up against that parentheses, they want you to multiply that number times everything in that parentheses. So the way we're going to do that is just one at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply 3 times x. Because we don't know what x is, the only possible solution we can get for that is 3x, because we don't quite know what x is yet. So when you multiply 3 times x, you get 3x. Just going to drop down this minus sign because that's just going to be a natural part of how we rewrite the question or the statement. And now we're going to multiply out 3 times 2. When we do that, that answer is 6. So we have just written 3 times x minus 2 in a different way. We've written it 3x minus 6. If you remember correctly, that was one of the choices. So we are gaining some confidence when we get to this one. All right, let's look at the next one they wanted us to look at. They wanted us to rewrite 2 plus x plus 2x minus 4 in a different way. The first thing we do here is we put like with like. We put like terms with like terms. And I see that there's 2 sections here that use letters. They both use x. So those x's can be anything at this point. We aren't solving for x. You can pretend you have a button plus 2 buttons. You can have a bottle cap plus 2 bottle caps. Either way, if we combine these like terms, if we just focus on these 2 like terms and add x plus 2x, either way, that's going to give us 3x. Then we just have to figure out the like terms of the numbers that are left over. If we combine 2 with negative 4, that's going to give us negative 2. We combine 2 with negative 4, that's going to give us negative 2. So another way to write 2 plus x plus 2x minus 4 is 3x minus 2. So these 2 answers we're going to look for when we get back. 3x minus 6 as a simplified way of writing that upper problem, and 3x minus 2 as a simplified way of writing that second problem. So let's jump in and see if those answers are there. And they are. So if you were working on this in your computerized GED exam or in your practice lessons, when we looked at 3x minus 2, that then became 3x minus 6. We would drag and drop that into that box. And our new way of writing this equation became 3x minus 2, and we're going to drop that into that equation. By simplifying algebraic expressions, solving equations, and inequalities, we are using that fancy word, the quadratic formula. Let's jump ahead. We're going to skip over. This was just non-iPad explanation of those problems. Let's talk a little bit about geometry today. So geometry can kind of throw people off sometimes because it's all that stuff with the shapes. I was definitely in that category. So let's look at what some possible geometry questions might revolve around. Again, shapes are an important part of math. The GED exam will ask questions about different types of shapes and how numbers relate to those shapes. Same thing with high set and task. So you need to learn about circles, triangles, quadrilaterals, cubes, prisms, pyramids, cylinders, and cones. The best part is, remember, you are going to have this handy dandy formula sheet. So let's just focus on area right now for the purposes of doing a demonstration here today. We're going to focus on area. And I'm going to write down a couple of these formulas so that they stay on our handy dandy iPad once we move over. The first one I'm going to write down is I'm going to write down that if we're looking for the area of a square, we know from our formula sheet that the area of a square is found by area equals side squared. Remember that square just means that number times itself. We know that the area of a rectangle, that formula sheet shows us, is found by area equals LW, which is length times width. We're going to use those two parts of this formula sheet in the example we're going to do together today. So let's jump over to iPad again. I'm going to share this section. Okay, so there's our formulas. I wrote them down there so we can see them. And again, if you're working on the actual exam on your computer, you will be able to keep that formula sheet screen and screen. So you won't have to write it down on your notes. But for today's purposes, because we are working, kind of scribbling things out on the iPad, I went ahead and wrote them down for us. But you will always have that formula sheet right beside you, and you can skip this step. So let's pretend that the test makers are asking us a question. They're asking us to find the area of a square. And they tell us, by drawing us this handy dandy little picture, that one of those sides is 4 long. Could be 4 miles, could be 4 inches, could be 4 who's a whatsies, whatever. They put a 4 next to this. And because it's a square, and we know that all sides are equal, we know that all of these sides also equal 4. That formula sheet tells us that if the test makers are asking us to solve for area, we are going to do side squared. So area equals side squared. What is our side? They just told us. Our side is 4. So we're going to do 4 squared. What does it mean to square something? It just means taking this number and multiplying it times itself. 4 times 4 equals 16. So very quickly, we have answered this one. Easy peasy. The area of this square is 16. Now, what if, some of this, come on, eraser. Alrighty. What if they're not asking about a square? What if they're asking about that rectangle? So again, let's write down what the area of a rectangle is on that formula chart, and we know that the area is length times width. So let's pretend that they showed us this picture of a rectangle. They showed us that this length is 10, this width is 5. We don't know, 10 whatever, 5 whatever, doesn't matter. If we are told then that we need to find the area, then all we do is multiply length times width. which means we're going to multiply 10 times 5. And that's going to give us an area of 50 whatever it is that they are measuring. It's not always going to be this easy. I understand that. But we need to understand these basic concepts so that when they do something that looks kind of like this, it won't throw us off. Let me show you an example of something I saw recently. Okay, you're given this shape. This is not a common shape. It's not a square, it's not a rectangle, it's not a triangle. But if you look closely at this shape, you can see some other shapes within it. So let's pretend that they told us that this side was 3. Let's pretend that they told us that the entire length of the bottom of this section is 8. And they told us that this height is 2. Okay, they did give us the shape. They gave us some numbers to work with. And they want us to find the area of this shape. Well, you say, Jen, there is no formula on my sheet to find the area of this funky looking shape. I have no idea what I'm going to do. Well, in this case, we're going to use what we know. If you look at this shape and use your imagination, you can draw an imaginary line right here in your head. And all of a sudden, this one shape becomes 2. It becomes a square and it becomes a rectangle. And we know how to find the area of a square, and we know how to find the area of a rectangle. So let's start with the square. Back on our formula sheet, it tells us that area equals side squared. They've told us that this side is 3. When we square 3, 3 times 3 is going to give us 9. So we know that this is 9. But we're not done yet because we still have to figure out the rectangle. We know that the area of a rectangle is length times width. So we're going to multiply this length, which they tell us is 8, times the width that they give us, which is 2. And that's going to equal 16. So all we have to do now is add these two areas together. I'm going to add my 16 plus my 3, and this is going to give me 19. So all of a sudden, this area for this shape, I know to be 19. So I still used my formula chart. I used what I knew, but I had to think critically. That's the kind of thing that they mean when they talk about thinking critically and taking things apart, putting them back together when it comes to this exam. Alrighty, so let's get back into our session. Bear with me. Here we go again. Alrighty, so use these formula charts, but you're also going to have to use your noggin when it comes to some common sense of figuring these things out. Alrighty, great expectations. We want you to have them. We want you to get in there and study for your subject matter, but we also want you to know what you can expect on these given tests. Remember that preparation and knowing what to expect is half the battle. Preparation takes time. And I want you to remember, regardless of any of those hangups that you have about math, regardless of any of those things that trip you up, learning differences, past experiences, any of those things, anyone can learn if given the right tools and the right amount of time. You just have to grant yourself grace when it's needed. Suck those things up out of your past, get them out of the things that are draining your confidence. Focus on your preparation, knowing what to expect, and walk in there with confidence. And what do you need? You might need a workbook. Remember, you can pick those up at our bookstore or on Amazon. You might need some review lessons. Those workbooks will have some review lessons in there. If you're already a student with Essential Education, you know that review tab is constantly filling up your review lessons. So you might need to go back for some reteaching on that. And know also that we are here to help. We mean that your success is our goal. We stand behind that. We want you to succeed, not only in these exams, but in your next steps in life. You can reach us at studenthelp at essentialed.com, and then you can also call us at our 1-800 number. Again, my name is Jen, and I'm here on the East Coast, so you can talk to me during certain hours of the day, and then you can also call up Sweet Rosie on our West Coast, and she is answering questions for you all out there. I hope that this has been beneficial. I hope it's been helpful, and as always, we're here for you if you need us. Thanks. Hope you join us again soon.